In 1973, 34% of construction deaths in Britain were head injuries, and almost no one on site wore a hard hat. 2/3 of workers smoked indoors. 1 in 3 shipyard men breathed asbestos dust daily. None of it was secret. All of it was completely normal. Today, every one of these practices is a criminal offence. What forced the change was measured not in regulations, but in lives. On a winter morning in 1973, Tom stepped onto a steel beam 5 stories above the ground. The brim of his flat cap pulled low against the chill. Around him, dozens of men moved along scaffolding and open girders, heads bare or shielded only by cloth caps. The clang of hammers and the sharp tang of hot metal filled the air. No one wore a hard hat unless a foreman insisted, and even then, the helmet was more likely to be slung over a shoulder than strapped on. Tom remembers the feeling underfoot, the steel slick with frost, a sudden gust threatening balance. He shrugs off the memory of a close call. You got a knock, you just carried on. Only the green lads bothered with helmets, and they caught flack for it. The law had just begun to change. Parliament passed the Health and Safety at Work Act in 1974, aiming to make workplaces safer. But on the ground, the culture lagged behind. The British standard for hard hats, BS 8225-1, was published in 1975, but it wasn't mandatory. Maggie, a former site clerk, recalls there were more flat caps than helmets. If you wore one, you stood out. The risk was woven into daily life. For Tom and his mates, a hard hat was a nuisance, not protection. The law said one thing, the site did another. That gap between regulation and reality would cost lives before it finally closed. In the 1970s, asbestos dust floated through British workspaces as casually as flour in a bakery. Maggie, who worked as a clerk on a hospital renovation, remembers watching maintenance crews spray insulation onto pipes and ceilings, the air shimmering with fine white fibers. No one wore masks. The dust settled on hair, skin, lunchboxes, an invisible hazard that seemed as ordinary as the concrete dust from a builder's boots. At the time, asbestos was hailed as a miracle material, fireproof, cheap, and everywhere. 1 in 3 shipyard and construction workers spent their days exposed, often at levels exceeding 2 milligrams per cubic meter, 20 times the modern legal limit of 0.1 milligrams per cubic meter. The first attempt to control this came with the 1976 Control of Asbestos Regulations, but enforcement was weak and most workers believed the risk was minimal. Tom, now retired, recalls, "We just thought it was dust. Nobody warned us." The full ban on asbestos use in the UK would not arrive until 1999, decades after the dangers were first known. For thousands, the true cost of that normality would not appear until years later, when the diagnoses of asbestosis and mesothelioma began to surface among former colleagues. Maggie still remembers the silence that followed the first funeral. We never saw it coming. By then, it was too late. The air inside a 1970s British factory or office was thick with cigarette smoke, as much a part of the working day as the rattle of machines or the ring of a telephone. 68% of indoor workers smoked regularly on site in 1976. Ashtrays overflowed on desks, and the blue haze of tobacco drifted through corridors, canteens, even hospital wards. Ruth, a retired NHS secretary, still recalls a yellowed memo from her supervisor. Staff are reminded not to smoke in patient areas during visiting hours. She laughs at the memory. No one paid it much mind. Smoking was woven into the social fabric of work, a way to break tension, barter favors, or simply pass the time between shifts. Tom, who worked at the night press, remembers the smell of burnt tobacco mixing with hot oil and ink, the taste of smoke lingering on his tongue hours after his shift ended. No one questioned the habit, not even as coughs became routine and eyes stung in the fug. It would take another 3 decades before the law caught up with the health risks. In 2007, the UK banned smoking in all enclosed workplaces, with a £200 fine for anyone who lit up indoors. The silence that followed was as striking as the change in air. Today, the only smoke on a factory floor is the memory of a world where cigarettes were as common as pay slips. The clang of machinery waits just beyond the haze, promising a new kind of danger. The factory floor in 1976 was a forest of moving steel. Exposed gears spun inches from a worker's sleeve, conveyor belts snapped into life without warning, and the whine of motors drowned out shouted warnings. Around 1.2 million reportable injuries were logged in a single year across England and Wales, many caused by hands, hair, or clothing caught in unguarded machinery. Tom still remembers the sharp metallic snap as a colleague's glove was pulled into a press, the machine stopping only after the damage was done. Guards, if present at all, were often makeshift, scraps of plywood, a bit of mesh wire. The British Machine Tool Manufacturers Association argued in a 1976 memo that retrofitting proper guards would be too expensive, a claim echoed by Maggie, who recalls management's reluctance. They said, "If we fit guards on every machine, we'll go under. It's not practical." For years, cost and custom outweighed caution. It wasn't until the Machinery and Equipment Safety Regulations of 1992 that full guarding became a legal requirement, forcing employers to shield every dangerous moving part. Before that, a worker's safety depended on luck, habit, and the hope that experience would keep them clear of the metal teeth. Steelworks, shipyards, and textile mills in the 1970s thundered with a wall of sound that never let up. Inside the Sheffield steel plant, noise levels regularly surged above 100 decibels, louder than a chainsaw, relentless from the first shift bell to the last. Tom remembers the sensation, a physical pressure in the chest, words lost in the roar, ears ringing for hours after clocking off. Across Britain, 6 out of every 10 industrial workers faced this barrage daily. There were no ear defenders, no warning signs about hearing loss, just the expectation to carry on. "You'll get used to the racket," older hands told the new lads, but the price was steep. By 1979, Sheffield's union clinics reported an epidemic of permanent hearing loss among welders and grinders, many in their 30s. Dr. Sarah Linton, an occupational audiologist, described the damage as a silent thief. The loss crept in year by year, invisible until men couldn't follow a conversation or hear a warning shout. The law lagged far behind. It wasn't until the Control of Noise at Work regulations in 2000 that employers were forced to monitor exposure and provide hearing protection. For thousands, the damage was already done. Proof that what was once dismissed as background noise was, in truth, a daily hazard hiding in plain sight. A lunchtime pint was as much a fixture on British building sites as the tea flask or the bacon sandwich. Ruth, who joined the GMB in 1977, still remembers the union pamphlet passed around the canteen. "A nip in your tea keeps the cold out, but 3 pints and you're no use to anyone." The line drew laughter, but it captured a truth. Alcohol was woven into the fabric of working life. On Fridays, some crews would head to the pub at noon, return with a flush to their cheeks, and finish the shift with hands less steady than before. Tom recalls the easy routine. You'd keep a bottle in your locker, or a mate would bring cans. Nobody checked. In 1976, a Glasgow dockyard crane operator crashed his load after lunch. The coroner's report found a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08%, enough to impair judgment, but not unusual for the era. It wasn't until the 1990s that employers faced real pressure to act. The Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations of 1999 made it a legal duty to manage substance misuse on site. By then, the culture of the 3-pint lunch had faded, replaced by zero-tolerance rules and routine testing. Drinking on the job, once a sign of camaraderie, had become grounds for dismissal, or if tragedy struck, for criminal prosecution. The risks were no longer just personal, they were a matter for the courts. Tom remembers the wind whipping across the top of Center Point, his boots balanced on a narrow beam, nothing but open air on either side. Harnesses were almost unheard of on most sites. 7 out of 10 scaffolders worked without any kind of fall protection. The bravest men walked the steel in flat caps, trusting their balance and nerve, convinced that a rope or harness would only get in the way. In August 1974, the scaffolding at Center Point collapsed, killing 4 workers and sending shockwaves through the industry. The coroner's inquest pointed to the lack of guardrails and personal fall arrest systems as a direct cause. Yet for years, this kind of risk was accepted as part of the job. It wasn't until the work at height regulations came into force in 2005 that employers were legally required to provide harnesses and plan every step above ground level. The old bravado, once seen as a badge of skill, became a punishable offense. Wages handed out in brown envelopes were a fixture of 1970s construction sites. For many, cash in hand meant quick pay and no questions, but it also meant no pay slips, no sick pay, and no safety net if things went wrong. Around 15% of the building workforce worked this way, off the books, outside the formal system. Ruth, then a union secretary, remembers reading a 1978 flyer warning, "No contract, no rights, no compensation." The risks were real. When disaster struck a Birmingham demolition site in 1977, families of undocumented laborers found themselves with no legal claim, their work invisible in the eyes of the law. This hidden workforce was common until the Employment Rights Act of 1996 extended legal protections to all employees, even those hired informally. In the 1990s, HMRC began a crackdown on undeclared pay, and PAYE enforcement rose sharply. The shift closed a loophole that had left thousands unprotected, linking safety to the right to be seen and counted. Legal lines, once blurred, are now drawn in black-letter law, yet over 1 million work injuries still occur in the UK each year. What seems normal today will be judged tomorrow. The real test is whether safety remains a right, not a relic. Share your thoughts below.